So how do we figure out the rules for division? The key is that division is the opposite of multiplication. To demonstrate this, let's give some multiplication facts. 5 times 3 is equal to 15. You can figure this out using repeating addition if you would wish. 5 times 12 is equal to 60. 6 times 10 is equal to 60. 6 times 2 is equal to 12. 4 times 3 is equal to 12. Because division is the opposite of multiplication, now let's find these following division facts by going the opposite for these multiplication facts. 15 divided by 3. So we want to find when 15 is the answer when you multiply, when it is the product, and 3 is one of those numbers being multiplied. So here it is on the first line. 15 being the answer of the multiplying, being the product, and 3 as one of the numbers being multiplied. So 15 divided by 3 is equal to 5. What about 12 divided by 6? So we want to find when the answer of being multiplied is 12. So that's why we cannot use the second line, is because the answer of being multiplied, the product, is not 12. We also want to find when 6 is one of those numbers being multiplied. 6 is a factor, and that's why we cannot use the last line. 6 is not being multiplied. So here's 12 on the fourth line, and also 6. So 12 divided by 6 is equal to 2. Now what about 60 divided by 5? So we want to find when 60 is the answer when you multiply, that it is the product. We also want to find when 5 is one of those numbers being multiplied. So that's why we cannot use the third line. 5 is not a number being multiplied in the third line. So 60 and 5 here. So 60 divided by 5 would be 12. So that is how you can find division facts, by going the opposite of multiplication facts. So we already gone over the rules for multiplication for positive and or negative numbers. But what about the rules for division? Writing down the rules of multiplication can help us, because division is the opposite of multiplication. The rules for multiplication are: positive times positive is positive, positive times negative is negative, negative times positive is negative, negative times negative is positive. However, this is not all the rules for all the real numbers. There is one number that is neither positive nor negative. It is 0. And we need to write down all the rules of multiplying so that we can go back when we do division. For example, if 0 times positive was positive, if that was the case, then positive divided by positive would not only be positive, but would also be 0. 0 times a, so a is a variable. It stands for any number. In this case, 0 times a is equal to 0. So a quick detour. Why does 0 times a equal 0? We already know that 3 times 5 is equal to 5 plus 5 plus 5. That is using repeating addition. We have 3 5s, and that is equal to 15. 2 times 5 is equal to 5 plus 5. That is repeating addition. We are using 2 5s, and that is 10. 1 times 5, you have 1 5, and that would be 5. If you want to see a pattern here, we can think, how do we get from 15 to 10? We subtract 5. How do we get from 10 to 5? We subtract 5. In fact, if you started from 100 times 5, you would find that the pattern would be subtract 5, subtract 5, subtract 5. So to find 0 times 5, you subtract from 5, 5. And 5 minus 5 is 0. So when we subtract 5, we find that 0 times 5 is equal to 0. You can use this technique to show that 0 times any number, not just 5, is equal to 0. 3a, so that means 3 times a is equal to a plus a plus a. 2a is equal to a plus a. 1a, you have 1a, and so that's equal to a. To go from 3a to 2a, you subtract a. To go from 2a to a, you subtract a. Continuing this pattern, subtract a to figure out what 0 times a is. And that would be 0 because a minus a is equal to 0. There's one more rule, and then we'll cover all the rules for multiplication for all real numbers. Well, at least those about positive, negative, and 0. And that is a times 0. And a times 0, that means any number times 0, is equal to 0. Here's why. 3 times 0 is equal to 0 plus 0 plus 0. That is repeating addition. We have 3 zeros, and that is equal to 0. 2 times 0 is equal to 0 plus 0, which is 0. 1 times 0, you have 1 0, and therefore 1 times 0 is equal to 0. To get from 0 to 0, you do nothing. To get from 0 to 0, you do nothing. So the pattern would be nothing. So 0 times 0 is equal to 0. Do nothing again. Negative 1 times 0 is equal to 0. Nothing again. Negative 2 times 0 is equal to 0. Nothing again. Negative 3 times 0 is equal to 0. So a times 0 is equal to 0. That means that any number times 0 is equal to 0. Let's now go over the rules for division when you have positive and or negative numbers. We would go opposite for these multiplication rules because division is the opposite of multiplication. Suppose we want to figure out what positive divided by positive is. These numbers may not be the same, but both of them are positive. So we want to find a case for the multiplication side in which has two aspects. The answer when you multiply is positive. That means that the product is positive. And also one of those factors, one of those numbers that are being multiplied is positive. So the only case for these rules of multiplying in which this is the case is the first line. Here is the positive product, and here is one of the positive factors. The factor left is also positive, so positive divided by positive is positive. What about the other factor? What if we include that one instead? So here's the positive product, here's the other positive factor, and so positive divided by positive is still positive. What about positive divided by negative? So we want the answer when you multiply to be positive, the product to be positive, and we want one of those factors that you are multiplying to be negative. The only line in which this is the case is the fourth line. Here is the positive product. Here is one of the negative factors. The factor left is negative, so positive divided by negative is negative. What happens if you use the other negative factor? Here is the positive product again. Here is the other negative factor, and still the factor left is negative, so positive divided by negative is negative. So what happens if we have negative divided by positive? So we want the product to be negative and one of the factors to be positive. One of the lines that does this is the third line. Here's the negative product and the positive factor. And what we're left with is negative. So negative divided by positive is negative. It also works for the second line. Here is the negative product, the positive factor, and what we're left with is negative. So negative divided by positive is negative. So what about negative divided by negative? So we want to find a case in which the answer when you multiply is negative and one of those factors that you multiply with is also negative. These numbers may be different, but both of them are negative. So here is negative as a product. Here is negative as a factor, and what we're left with is positive. So negative divided by negative is positive. We can also use the third line for this one. Negative product, negative factor, and left with positive. So negative divided by negative is positive. So as you might have noticed, these rules are the same for multiplication with positive and or negative numbers if you switch the division sign to a multiplication sign. So that makes it easier to remember the division rules because they are the same as the multiplication rules. The next video is about the summary. Here is attached a link that you can click if you would wish.